Welcome to the Untold Tales audio anthologies. Written by Dr. Jeffrey A. Robinson and narrated by Melissa Del Toro Schaffner. The Collector. Part 1. The Interview. Without warning, the person standing behind Andre yanked off the hood that covered his head. With his hands still bound behind him, he couldn't do anything except blink, and he tried to survey his surroundings. It took a few seconds before he discovered that he was seated in a chair next to an empty metal table. Two very bright lights glared in his face, and nothing else in the room was visible because the lights masked out everything else. Closing his eyes against the glare of those lamps, he could do nothing except wait. From the darkness on the other side of the lights, he heard a voice. "Do you know where you are?" "Of course not," he replied angrily. "You had me switch cars twice. You'd led me to 3 dead drops for instructions, and finally grabbed me in an alley near an abandoned mall, dragged me into a van, and hooded me before bringing me. How the hell could I possibly know where I am?" "We had to make sure you weren't followed." Andre started to fire back an angry retort, but he bit his tongue and remained silent. "Let me ask you a different question then," said the voice. "Do you know why you're here?" "Well," he replied, "I was told that this would be an interview for a high-level security position, but it looks like that might not be the case." "But don't you want a job, a nice-paying one? After all, you've been unemployed for more than 2 years, and you've barely been getting by. Of course, I understand how difficult it can be to find work, especially when you have a reputation like yours following you around." "You wouldn't understand," he grumbled. "But of course I do, Major Gasparov. But that isn't quite correct, is it? You don't hold any rank anymore in either the FSB or the GRU. Andrei Gasparov was dishonorably discharged from the Russian Federation Intelligence Service back in 2000, following a disastrous breach of security at a facility that he was in charge of." "It wasn't my fault." "Of course it wasn't. You were betrayed, set up, and finally used as a scapegoat. You just happened to get caught in the middle of a dispute between US, Russia, and a couple of other countries. Sadly, you were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But you were nevertheless court-martialed, disgraced, and driven out of the military. Let me ask you one last question. Do you know who I am?" "Well, based on your accent, your methods, and your interest in my past, I'd guess that you're Levin Morrissey, formerly a consultant with the US government. But now, if I am correct, you are also unemployed, having fallen out of grace with whatever 3-letter agencies originally employed you." The lights that blinded him were suddenly turned away, revealing a tall, thin man with silver hair, leaning on the table in front of him. "Very good. But you are familiar with a different name that people call me. Yes, you are the Collector." "Correct. You are far smarter than I had been led to believe. Yes, I am the Collector. Now, humor me. Tell me what it is that I collect, and why." Andre sighed deeply and hung his head. "You are seeking the artifact, the reliquary. The artifacts and relics that were left behind. Or, as you called them, the oblomki, the debris." "Yes, the oblomki. Though I think of them as more scientific relics, technological objects of great importance. But tell me, why am I looking for these things?" "Because you're a certified madman and a lunatic," he thought. "You're a rich eccentric and one of those UFO freaks who are obsessed with anything that hints of the weird and exotic." But he couldn't say that. This guy had a reputation for being quite unstable, and God knew what would happen if he really found out what Andre really thought of him. Instead, Andre started telling the story. back in the fall of 1990. A ship of unknown origin landed in a heavily wooded region near southern Tajikistan, near the western end of the Himalayas. Records indicate that it was detected by military elements of the former USSR, but it was ignored as an errant aircraft or meteor. Tajikistan authorities did not respond, either since their country was in turmoil at the time. It was, after all, in the process of splitting off from the Soviet Union. In any case, neither country sent any official to investigate the incident, though it was soon discovered by hikers and mountain climbers. The first people on the scene concluded that a ship of unknown origin had landed there. A few felt it might have been an extraterrestrial in nature, but that it only remained for about 48 hours before it departed. In any case, the vehicle left a considerable amount of material behind. Word spread about the strange sight in the mountains. Others sought out the location, and a few reported their findings to local authorities. Still, it was more than 6 months before any official teams arrived. But by then, the site had been visited by multiple groups and had been pretty badly picked over. However, investigative teams still found that a considerable amount of material remained. The Russians secured the site and built a special facility nearby. The bunker, as it became known, was where the alien relics were temporarily stored for analysis. Over time, though, the building was fortified and reinforced and soon resembled a small fortress. The relics, consisting of more than 150 items, resided there for 7 years. And you were in charge of that facility, weren't you, Major Gasparov? Yes, replied Andrei, lowering his eyes. However, despite initial security measures, outsiders learned of the alien artifacts and demanded that the items and the findings be shared. Powerful groups including China, the US, India, and Pakistan. Andrei simply nodded his head. So, you were in charge of that facility when it was raided by the Syrians, were you not? You were responsible when External breached your security, overwhelmed your people, and stole all of the alien artifacts. Andrei objected. The Syrians had been given intel by the US, who secretly hired them to conduct the heist. Morrissey laughed. But that didn't matter, did it? Because the stolen items were intercepted by the Israelis, who diverted the shipment to a secret location in Lebanon, called the Facility. It was a special high-tech research laboratory where they had intended to hide the objects. Andrei did not reply. And that's where they reside to this day. Is that not correct? Yes, said Andrei, grudgingly. But that wasn't the end of it all, because the other interested countries soon discovered where the artifacts had been taken, and they all descended on the site, intending to take them back by force. The Israelis, however, threatened to destroy everything if anyone tried to take their prize. Since then, the facility has been jointly operated by 4 countries: the US, Israel, Syria, and Russia. And why do you think I care about any of this? Asked Morrissey. Andrei angrily snapped back, saying, Because you spent the last 2 decades gathering all of the other items that had been taken from the site before the Russians arrived. You've been collecting everything not already in their possession. You obviously want what's in the facility as well. Right again. From the photographs the first hikers took of the initial landing site, we identified 267 different objects of extraterrestrial origin. The facility housed 151 of them, mostly the larger ones. Since then, I have acquired more than 90 of the remaining 111 objects. It has taken years to trace down the people who plundered the site, and many of the objects they took were secretly bought and sold. A few of the more interesting pieces have changed hands many times since then. Nevertheless, I have most of them now, and I'm tracking down the few that remain. In fact, I expect to gain possession of all of them shortly. However, I need your help. Huh? Asked Andrei. What could you possibly need from me? Oh, I thought my motives would be obvious. You've been so good at guessing the answers to my questions, so far. Andre responded with silence. Well then, if you can't figure it out, let me tell you. I want you to help me break into the facility in Lebanon and take all the relics that are there. Andre scoffed. It was then that someone behind him removed the zip ties that bound his hands. Grasping his wrists, he rubbed them, trying to restore circulation to his fingers. Me? Why me? Because you know what these objects are, and why they're so important. You are one of the few who really know what's at stake, and who the players are. You're also familiar with the security that's likely to be in place there. Lastly, I need you because, in 6 weeks, all of the alien artifacts at the facility are scheduled to be crated up and shipped off to an underground facility in the U.S. The Raven Rock Mountain Complex, RRMC, near Blue Ridge Summit, Pennsylvania. It's an impenetrable fortress that was built under a mountain at the height of the Cold War, and it's designed to withstand multiple direct hits by megaton nuclear missiles. If I don't acquire those objects before they're moved, I'll never have the chance to bring all of them together. Andre blinked in surprise. Look, said Morrissey, I've been working with these objects since they were first found. I advised and counseled those in charge, but they didn't believe me. I've done all I can, and I have to finally admit that I can't do it alone. The fools who've possessed these things haven't been able to do anything with them in the decades that they have studied them. That's the problem with specialists. They only see what is visible with their tiny domain of expertise. They're not real scientists. They're glorified technicians and political hacks. No one there has a clue about the bigger picture. I, on the other hand, am a generalist, a multidisciplinarian, a polymath, a jack of all trades, and a master of many. I have degrees in physics, chemistry, biology, math, astronomy, and even linguistics. The people working with these relics don't understand that they're all connected to one another in a very special way. I tried to tell them that, but they wouldn't listen. They cast me out and discredited me. Like you, I was a scapegoat for their own incompetence. They labeled me a madman, a conspiracy theorist, and a UFO cultist. But I'm not. I'm perhaps the only real scientist that ever worked with these relics. That's why I've made it my mission to gain control over this alien technology. If I can collect all the pieces, I can show them what they've been unable to see. But I'll need your help. I can't do it alone. I'd like to hire you to help me gather and train teams to steal those items before they're moved. I'll pay you $3 million for your time, and you'll finally have the opportunity to stick it back to the people that unjustly blamed you and humiliated you. Are you interested? Andre thought about the unexpected offer. He had to admit it was something he had actually wished for many times in the past 2 decades. He sat silently for a few moments, carefully considering the benefits, the risks, and the rewards. Maybe this guy wasn't the crackpot he'd always been told about. Maybe he was the real deal, and he was the one who could solve the mystery of the alien artifacts. Finally, he looked up, smiled, and said, "Sure, why the hell not?" Part 2. Recruiting. Andre closed the thick folder in front of him and stood up from his desk. Extending his hand, he said, "Welcome to the team, Arif. Your credentials are solid and your resume speaks for itself." The man Andre addressed smiled and took Andre's hand, shaking it firmly. He was of medium height, but had a lithe athletic build and dark, piercing eyes. He bore the confidence of a man who had spent years in the military. "So when do we start?" asked Arif. "Right away. I need your people here as soon as possible so we can start training. We have a very tight schedule. And while we've already completed background checks on all the mercenaries in your group, I still need to access them individually." "I understand, and the mission parameters are acceptable, but I require more information." Andre's eyes narrowed. "Look, I know you are a lieutenant colonel in the Syrian armed forces, but I need to remind you that you do not hold any rank here. You are a civilian now. You are simply a mercenary for hire named Arif Sajad, and I am your new employer. You don't make demands of me. Is that clear? Yes, replied Arif. But you are no longer with the Russian Federation either. Do you expect me to call you Major? No, you should simply address me as Sir. Is that understood? Yes, sir, answered Arif. Then his voice softened and he said, And I mean no disrespect, but I need to know more about our mission. You said it was classified, and I understand that means my soldiers should not have such information. Details must, of course, be compartmentalized. But as their leader, I need to know more about what you would have us steal and the forces that will oppose us. Andre nodded. That was more than reasonable. He gestured to Arif to take a seat, and then began telling him the tale about alien visitors, the landing site, and all the artifacts that had been gathered. He told them about the facility and the time pressure they were under to retrieve the items there. The explanation took considerable time, and Arif had a lot of questions. I think I understand your reason better now, said Arif, but I don't see what is so special about these objects. Well, while most people think they are items that were just dumped here when the travelers stopped for emergency repairs, others think they might have been left here on purpose. In any case, it was obvious from the beginning that some of them had very unique properties. For instance, there is the pylon that does not seem to have an energy source that lights up periodically by some cycle we don't understand. Then there is the box. It is the largest of all the items, about the size of an armchair. It is made of metal and has about a dozen ports across its surface, but it periodically becomes invisible. People are desperate to understand how that occurs. They want to productize and weaponize it for their respective countries. Most are smaller. There is the probe, which looks like a screwdriver, except that it vibrates when it touches any other alien artifact. There are about a dozen connectors that seem to function like lug bolts, but they're smooth and have no threads. Then there's the unfastener, which does just that. It undoes connections of all sorts: solder points, nuts and bolts, screws, nails, and bricks. It alters physics associated with nanotribology and reduces friction to zero to localized regions. Then there's the universal tool that changes into many different forms, though no one understands what any of them do. There's the sheet, which looks like a drop cloth or tarp, except it cannot be cut or burned. It's immune to acid and heat. You can't burn it, and it appears to be a thermal superconductor. There are chips and flakes, small metal shards that eschew gravity. They are super light and some even float. They are the size of potato chips and fragile and easily destroyed. One item the scientists called vacuum gel metal, a liquid metal that is ultralight and radiates no light or infrared light, regardless of how it gets. It would revolutionize material science if could duplicate it. One is simply called the hot rock. It's radioactive and continuously emits beta and gamma radiation, but there appear to be no unstable isotopes and it follows no known decay process. Finally, there's the oblomki, items that appear to be nothing more than debris or garbage. These are things that had been identified as alien bio-waste, odd organics that could have been food, scat, or garbage. There are about 20 pounds of the stuff. There are pot shards, discarded inoperative items that could be trash or just broken items. Some resemble bowls, tubes, splinters, and crystal shards that resemble transparent glass-like pieces, some as thin as human hair. Fragments and metal of broken rods of an unknown alloy. The strangest is the gray mold, and that's exactly what it appears to be. It looks like a grayish-blue bread mold. It was originally just some discarded pieces of food. It can grow on anything that's carbon-based, wood, paper, or even people. It can be washed off and ammonia kills it. It hates chlorophyll and won't touch anything that's green. Unfortunately, it grows quite quickly. After a day it touches anything, the object becomes covered in the stuff. After a day, the mold grows thicker, like rodent fur. If not washed off, it can eat people from the inside out. Infected tissues become necrotic, causing gangrene, blood poisoning, and septic shock. It grows in one's lungs, and the dying breath actually expels spores in a thick, black cloud. The US wants to commercialize it since it is a vigorous plastic eater and could convert plastics to an oil-like sludge. Russia wanted to weaponize it and turn it into an aerosol bioweapon. The spores are easily filtered by a mask and infections are stopped with an ammonia rinse, but it is perhaps the most deadly and valuable thing left by the aliens. Morrissey, the collector, wants to take all these things from big governments who want to misuse them. When Arif had no more questions, he said, "I think I understand now why these items need to be retrieved. It sounds like they're too dangerous for the superpowers to be allowed to play with. You're sure, however, the collector has no such designs for them?" "Yes," answered Andre. "He would never willingly share them with anyone." But he did not explain why, because he was uncertain now whether Morrissey was mad or just a rich, well-intentioned scientist. "If that's all then," said Andre, "get your teams assembled so we can start training them on the specifics of our plan." "Yes, sir," said Arif, who then turned and left. Part 3. The Attack. The two teams were in position. Arif led the main force, consisting of 36 battle-hardened mercenaries, armed with special weapons, combat armor, and advanced electronics. Their mission was to assault the facility and collect the artifacts which were already in crates. Andre led a smaller 6-man team at the other end of the compound. They were supposed to create a diversion for Arif. Andre had wanted to lead the main force, but Morrissey insisted that Andre should remain with the smaller group, since they were the backup for the primary team, in case things went wrong. All of the scientists and researchers had supposedly left the facility, and only a handful of guards remained to protect the artifacts that were scheduled to be moved the next morning. The guards inside likely outnumbered and outgunned their strike force teams, but Morrissey had some tricks up his sleeve. These consisted of useful artifacts already in his possession. Morrissey had used one alien object to mask all signs of their arrival. It was a flat, disc-shaped piece of metal that somehow provided perfect camouflage. Just before the attack, he planned to use another item, a tube that projected a narrow EMP pulse that could destroy anything electronic. At a precise predetermined moment, the device was activated, and the power and communications to the facility were cut. The plan called for Andre to withhold any fire until Arif advanced, but almost immediately, small arms fired rang out from the larger group. Seconds later, explosions sounded, and it was clear that there had been a full-scale battle going on at the other end of the facility. "Plan B! Plan B!" shouted Morrissey over the comlinks. Damn, thought Andre. He hated Plan B. It meant everything had gone wrong. It meant Arif was now the diversion and would pull everyone away from Andre. Following the alternate plan, Andre and his 5 companions put on gas masks, breached the doors by the loading dock, and tossed in gas canisters that put any remaining guards to sleep. After waiting 90 seconds, they entered and found a half-dozen guards unconscious on the ground. But just as they had been told, there were a dozen large crates ready for pickup. 2 of Andre's men went outside and backed up their large truck to the loading dock. As soon as the vehicle stopped, the remaining team members wheeled the nearby crates directly into the empty truck. In under 2 minutes, they were done. Hopping into the trucks, they drove off into the night, fleeing the battle that still raged on behind them. However, as they fled to their extraction point, one member of Andre's team started gagging and coughing. Andre realized that the man's mask had not been adjusted properly, and he had probably inhaled some of the gas. However, the soldier's eyes rolled back in his head, and he started convulsing as he began foaming at the mouth. It was then that Andre realized that the canisters had not contained knockout gas, but rather a fast-acting nerve agent. As they reached the nearby airfield where they would transfer the crates to the waiting planes, Andre decided that the situation at the facility had not failed at all. Arif's team had been the diversion all along, and those 36 men had been sacrificed to allow Andre's smaller team to collect the artifacts. Gritting his teeth, Andre decided that Morrissey wasn't a benign benefactor after all. He was totally ruthless about getting what he wanted. As they approached their evacuation point, Andre wondered what else Morrissey had lied about. Part 4. The Aftermath. The plane that carried Andre, his men, and the crates of alien artifacts finally landed at their destination after a long 19-hour flight. The 15,800 kilometers they had traveled ended at a small airstrip on a small man-made island in Micronesia in the Pacific Ocean. With the overall flight time and time zones they had crossed, it was night when they arrived. The island had no official name. It had been built by the Micronesia Climate Trust as an experiment to counter global warming and rising sea levels. The tiny patch of land had been created from two undersea atolls, Namnatal and Taramoru. Both of them sank underwater at high tide and only appeared briefly at low tide. One reef had been dredged for rock and material that had been piled up on the other. Eventually, the second atoll was raised more than 20 meters, creating an island that was more than 1,200 acres in size. The only things on the island were the small airstrip, a half-dozen buildings, and a small dock. The Isle Creation Project had been abandoned since this particular solution to rising sea levels had proved to be far too expensive. The unnamed spit of land had been sold to Morrissey under the guise of several shell corporations. Conveniently, the island was not officially a part of any international country. When the plane came to rest at the end of the runway, the 12 wooden boxes were taken to a large laboratory that rivaled the facility. Morrissey promptly notified the other stakeholder countries that he had their goods, but he also provided evidence that his new facility was wired with explosives and that all the buildings were rigged to destroy everything if any outsiders tried to take them back. Andre watched as the crates were taken to a large warehouse where the contents were opened and processed. Individual pieces were carefully carried to a larger room at the end of the hangar, a place filled with fluorescent lights and long white tables. Technicians in cleanroom suits carefully removed each item and systematically cataloged, photographed, and measured it. Each object was confirmed using blow-up photographs taken by the hikers who had first found the site. The process was slow, methodical, and time-consuming. Morrissey was extremely agitated and talked so quickly that he was almost out of breath. "More than 90% of all the artifacts are now in my possession," he said. "It will take a few weeks to unpack everything and to document it all properly, but we will finish soon enough. I still have a dozen artifacts that I need to collect. Until we're done, I want you to be in charge of security for this facility. Just tell me what you need. Cost is no object, of course. The others will undoubtedly try to intervene, but I want you to stop them." Andre nodded, uncertain of what to say. Morrissey had just sacrificed more than 36 men to claim these objects. Andre wanted to confront him, but knew that the madman could just as easily turn on him. The collector didn't care about anyone or anything except for his collection. Andre followed Morrissey as he continued babbling, but he stopped when he reached the end of the inspection area. On the other side of a large, wide door was a single room, more than 100 yards across. The floor consisted of dirt and rock, and Andre thought it looked quite strange, until he realized that it was an almost exact duplicate of the original alien crash site. The ground had been sculpted to resemble the terrain there. Rocks and tree stumps, branches, and leaves had been strategically placed to make the area within the hangar an an exact duplicate of that location. Workers, using rulers and laser measurement equipment, carefully repositioned each artifact back into their original locations relative to one another. Once in place, they were photographed once more. As Andre listened, it became apparent that Morrissey believed that if all the artifacts were recovered and placed back in their original positions, all the objects would somehow be activated, and that they would reveal the location of the aliens and allow them to be contacted using the equipment that they had left behind. He's insane, thought Andre. He's totally mad. As he listened to Morrissey's rant, Andre recalled details of the cargo cults that had appeared during World War II on isolated desert islands that had never had contact with the outside world. When the inhabitants of those islands saw American and Japanese planes fly high overhead, they thought aircraft were gods descending from heaven. To appease these deities and summon them to their villages, the islanders had built replicas of the planes they saw, constructing them out of wood, palm fronds, and grass. Andre remained speechless when he decided that Morrissey shared that strange insanity. The strange pseudoscientist thought that the Oblomki had magical or mystical properties, and he was intent on building an imitation of the original crash site to lure the aliens back to Earth. For a while, Andre wasn't sure what to do or say. If he confronted Morrissey directly, he would likely be killed. It was then that Andre achieved a sense of certainty. After decades of seeing and hearing about these artifacts, he decided that there was nothing really special about them at all. Each item was, in some way, broken. None of them seemed to work properly. Some did nothing at all. Maybe the skeptics had been right all along. These objects had simply been left behind by extraterrestrials who had stopped here for some reason. They had been discarded. They were just alien debris, jetsam, and ultimately they were of no importance at all. Yet people like his superiors and Morrissey had spent a good portion of their lives devoted to the study of this garbage that had been cast aside by alien litterbugs. Then, without offering any kind of explanation, Andre calmly left the hangar and headed over to the airfield. Once there, he approached Morrissey's private airplane, the one that was always fueled up and ready to fly. Overpowering the guard, he nonchalantly stole the plane and headed southwest. He had decided that he would turn himself over to the authorities in Australia. Maybe with a little luck, he'd be freed and be able to find someplace obscure where he could spend his $3 million. Any place, he thought, would be safer than with that madman. Thank you for listening. As you know by now, we love our listeners, fans, patrons, and supporters. We'd like to hear from you and let us know what you think. The best way to do that is to subscribe on our website, untold-tales.com. That's untold-tales.com. We want to make sure that we are creating stories and an experience that you're enjoying. So subscribe on our website. That'll put you on our email list. Again, thank you for listening and have a wonderful day.